in order to have existential independence, you need to have economic independence, emotional independence, intellectual independence of the current system. And these are several layers that are very hard to step through.
Welcome to Back to the Future podcast. My name is Victor Sadia, and I talk with brilliant minds and hearts of people who want to uproot and transform the current health and wellness paradigm. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Today we have Thomas Schindler. Thomas Schindler has led several projects and ventures to connect ideas and technology to address humanity's pressing crisis. He believes that while we technically can solve the planetary problems with technology, we cannot use these solutions until we have changed our collective stories. This is why he focuses on helping people to change their mind and awaken to the fact that everyone can make an impact. Thomas, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, man, so much for inviting me. It's been a long time.
So I want to start this conversation by, in your TED Talk, you began saying that when you were 10 years old, a Chernobyl nuclear cloud flew all over your house. And then those global circumstances were impacting your own. How is this way of thinking developed in your lifetime? And how do you see all these things that are happening out there in the big global arena really having to do with your own personal life and the way that you have been doing what you're doing?
So you're starting with the biggies right in the beginning. That's good. I would say that it has played this event that you refer to, this really visceral notion of what an enormous influence a tiny event, comparatively tiny events in the scope of the planet and time can have on our lives, has triggered this search and quest for the tiny rules and generator functions that we establish as or have established as a society in our culture and in our lives that give rise to the story that we're all living. And which of these generator functions are ones I think we should use, and which of those are ones that I think should be replaced, and which are ones that I think should be added. So in that sense, it sounds very abstract, but is a starting point for allowing to play with the components of the stories or the words of the stories that in order to rewrite the story. If you want to ask a question, go ahead. But there's one thing that I would like to tie into the rewriting of stories in very concrete terms from my personal experience and biography that has something to do with my personal mental health. It was a lot of fun smoking a lot of weed when I was around, I don't know, 19, 20. A lot. I smoked a lot, right? I woke up next to my bong every morning. And I smoked so much that I got paranoid. I got so paranoid to the point that I couldn't go outside and face people because I had this feeling that they knew something about me. And what they knew was how useless I am. Because in the state of constant partying and being zoned out, you're not really contributing anything to anything, right? And given that my foundational configuration of my mind is more or less one of contribution towards some higher purpose, that really felt like I was empty. And it was really visceral. I really couldn't leave the house. So I stayed inside. And what I understood was that I had taken a wrong turn somewhere in the past. And I wanted to go back to that turn in the past and rewrite that story from there and create a new option in my life. And so I first decided when that moment was, and that moment was around 14, 15 years old. So I had to go 5 years back in time. And the way I did it was by reading books that I had read during that time. And those books reactivated associations in my mind that hadn't been activated for a long, long time. And through that, activated entire patterns in my mind. So in a sense, I reset my brain to a state it was at 15 while I was 19 or 20. And through that, over the course of 2 years, that's how long it took to feel really comfortable in social environments again, which is one indicator that this was a real trauma. I learned to actively rewrite my story and also the contents of my mind. And why do I describe this? I describe this because I don't take any piece of any story for granted or for truth.
In the context of global stories, which we seldom see them as stories, we just see them as the reality. And as you say, you cannot take that reality as just universal truth. It's one thing to rewrite our own personal story, which is very, very difficult and very, really heart-wrenching and soul remaking. And then try to aggregate that process, that hero's journey process in a sense, and mimic that into a family, a community, and even in the global arena, because those stories are also shaped by some very powerful forces, which, as you said in your TED talk, also you don't have control over. But now there's a new movement globally, I sense, where instead of trying to change or fix some part of the problems and the narratives, we are really understanding that the whole narrative must be really traced back to a point where we really went astray. And we have an opportunity to reshape a story as a story, and then we'll see how the material world plays out after that story is conceived. So I know that this is a very big question, but how do you see this movement? And because I know you travel a lot and you work in several arenas, how do you see this idea of changing narratives really working in the global field, in the global arena?
I think it's so the way I look at this change of narratives is from two perspectives. One I call the push perspective. So you're in the current story and you're pushing towards a new story, and you're trying to infiltrate the current systems, the current dynamics, and change their behavior towards a desired outcome. And on the other hand, I see something I call a pull. So people trying to live and act inside of a new story and trying to make it desirable enough for other people to be pulled over. Now, the push approach has the typical problems of any systematic innovators situation. So I work with large corporates and help them with their innovation and transformation efforts. That's one of the things I do. And again, it shows that the systemic lock-ins they experience through the culture that they have established over the years are so strong that it is almost totally impossible to change the course of that system from within, which means that people step out of the organization, and from outside of the organizations, without the restrictions that the organization poses, and the immune system of the organization poses to them, moves creates something that then might be reintegrated and change the course of the overall organization or not. This is very hard to do on a species level, on a societal level. Right? How do you how do you fork out of society when all of your livelihood depends on that society? In a way, taking that step, which is the only logical consequence out of understanding the implications of the innovator's dilemma on a societal story shift level, taking that and saying, okay, the only way we have is to log out and start pulling. And so this makes it a stronger position for a new narrative to start living it and pulling. But I've yet to see an instance where people really pull this off. It's super, super hard because in order to have existential independence, you need to have economic independence, emotional independence, intellectual independence of the current system. And these are several layers that are very hard to step through for an individual or group. So I haven't seen any yet.
Right. So now that you were replying, a noise just came in, and I paused the video and asked you to just address that. And you just said, it's unforeseen rain that's happening here in Costa Rica. So I guess that we want to invite the rain into this conversation. It
We have to.
always, it's always part of the
It's
conversation, but now we'll
yeah,
just be even more aware that we are in an environment.
we have to. It's dry season here. This rain is rain season. Rain. This is exactly the rainy season time for rain. So we're in the middle of climate change. That's the realities here.
Yeah. And even though we have powerful technological appliances and applications, and we would like to shut off or shut down those noises and interruptions, technology won't really save us from ourselves and the
Yeah.
environment where we live. So I guess it's good that we are partnering with this rain to continue the conversation. So thank you for telling me that you haven't really seen a change or a shift in narrative in a global scale, and I agree with you. It's basically the most difficult thing to do. I have one example, like for example, in terms of the food system, we have all these ideas to change the food system, but at the same time, the system relies on the food that we currently have to survive. So those localized changes and those microcosm changes, I guess that we can refer in that way, is basically one of the best hopes we have into, as you say always, starting with a deep alignment with ourselves and our own family and small community. And then if enough people do these changes, then a global narrative might change. And this will take definitely a lot of time. And that's a factor I want to discuss with you. How do you see solving such urgent problems in the world that there are decades in the making, that the threats are very imminent, they're very close, they're very near, and at the same time, we will need time to change all those things. So, how can we invite time to this conversation?
Well, with my initial comments, I introduced the time travel uh, idea, and there's more to this. It is the capacity for us on an individual and on a social level to rewrite and relearn the way we do things. There's a beautiful book by Rian Eisler and I'm forgetting her co-author, unfortunately, Douglas Fry. It's called "Nurturing Our Humanity," and they actually show um, several cases of societies that consciously changed the way they acted in the world. So going from brutal killings into symbolic fights was in one observed tribe somewhere. I'm not recalling exactly where. Was one documented case where this is where the group consciously decided that they're going to stop doing this and instead going to um, engage in symbolic fights and at the stop that fight at the first sign of blood. So it's possible to rewrite those stories. It's totally possible. Another way to look at this is are these devices, right? Just a couple of years ago, say 13 years ago or so, we couldn't even imagine them. I mean, that's an often used image, but how dramatically have these things changed our lives? So, and that's the power of a story. The story can change your life literally overnight. Now, the question is, how can a group of people who are engaging in exploration of a new form of doing things create enough desirability and visibility for other people to be able to follow their story? And how can we be sure, as sure as humanly possible, to that this is what we're doing there is the best possible design for civilization? That's a hard question.
In the world of health, we know that there's one big narrative or one big driver of narrative is money, and you've said that money is a reward system for exploitation. In terms of healthcare, we see these big corporations in pharma and in food industry, insurance, hospitals, really having a perspective for the way they create profit, basically. And that's something that they really put forward, so that the whole system, the advertising, the way we organize and what we eat and how we treat disease fits the solutions they can offer. How is money in this sense, but also in the broader sense that you know very well, how a new narrative on money is needed as a driver for changing narratives?
I think that's one of the crucial elements here. So there are two interlocking systems that keep us currently in place and in check. One of them is our current design of money. So money by itself, or let's call it financial capital to be more precise. Financial capital by itself is not bad, but a design that is based on its eternal and exponential growth, plus its pure existence, being based on itself, um, generating something you could call money over money return, that is bad because that's essentially what we call a Ponzi scheme. And all of the any economist who denies that is either lying or hasn't understood how economy works, and never let allow anybody to tell you anything different. That's I think that's a very important fundamental thing for everybody to understand. So the second thing is that our the people who we give the power to organize our societies, our politicians, we have locked them into a usually 4 to 5 year marketing cycle, um, which is a race to the bottom of truth, or to the race to the bottom, away from truth towards shallowness and lies, necessarily so, because you cannot some things, and usually these are the hard and important things, need time, need large time horizons. They need commitments to going through some uncomfortable times, and this is not possible in a 4 year 2 year cycle system, right? Are you so we need to somehow unlock ourselves out of these two things. We could base our financial capital on HPI and the Happy Planet Index just to have a different optimization function. If we start optimizing our exponential growth based money, financial capital, on optimizing towards things we want more of, healthy seas, happy children, etc., then we will get more of them very quickly. But we won't do that because our political system is unfortunately also broken, and these two are interlocking. That's a huge problem. So how to get out of this? One way to get out of this could be to diversify the way you look at capital. So we traditionally acknowledge, because that's the only one we keep in our bank accounts and count, financial capital. But we are aware that we also have material capital. Material capital is usually very easy to translate into financial capital. But we have social capital. Social capital is much harder, maybe impossible to translate into financial capital, at least not directly. Indirectly, for sure. We have intellectual capital, spiritual capital, cultural capital, living capital, etc. And if you look at your life and what you need and expect from life, and you measure it in forms of these, your subjective understanding of your subjective wealth or needs in these capital forms, then you will discover that you probably need much less financial capital than you actually think you do. And that might be the first step in the emancipation from the financial capital um, lock in that we're experiencing.
You know, in this pandemic, I think there's a clear example on just that. You know, obviously the pandemic is affecting the poor much more than the rich, but even in the rich, affluent communities, the virus might just kill you. And even if you have millions of dollars in your bank account, what you need is a health or an immune capital. And in that sense, there's this idea that it can be diversified, as you said. I want to tie this into asking a question about your own lifestyle, your own health lifestyle, and how do you practice and live your daily habits in terms of keeping a healthy body, in a healthy mind, in a healthy spirit, and how this practice that you've been following for, I guess, a lot of years ties with this interdependence that you have with the environment, with the financial environment, and even the capitalistic environment that we live in. How are you giving votes for the way that you would like the world to be through the way that you behave, taking care of your own body?
So let me begin with the easy end, because the only active voting mechanism I engage in terms of my health with the economy is food, and that is pretty straightforward. Um, we started or we stopped using single-use plastic a couple of years ago. And not using single-use plastic limits your food choices dramatically. You can optimize, and so here in Costa Rica and in Berlin, where we live, both places, we have access to local food supply. So we get delivery directly from the farm in both places. And if we whatever else we buy, we just buy unpackaged, and that's usually fruit and vegetable. So what I'm eating, or we're eating, is fruit, vegetable, and eggs mostly. Um, of course, we enjoy things like sushi, for example, um, maybe even a steak from time to time. But usually, in Berlin, there's one butcher, and he knows every cow by name. Seriously, that's if you buy food there, but it costs like 6 to 10 times more than you would pay for the same amount of meat in the supermarket. But it's a different thing. It's an entirely different thing to eat that kind of meat. Um, the level of nourishment that you experience through that is something else. So that's my way of signaling to the economy what is of value to me. I used to also signal that I want to work out, subscribing to a whole bunch of different options for working out and fitness and what have you. I'm not doing that anymore because I distilled a routine for myself that works anywhere and without outside support, without any tools. I just need my body and some time. And I've done that more or less out of necessity, because I didn't have the time to do these things. I didn't have the time to go to some fitness center 15, even only 15 or 20 minutes away, change, do all of the stuff, and all the way back. That's more than 1 hour lost of my time. Instead, I can just, and I love doing that right in bed still. We have a futon, so it's pretty stiff, so you can do stuff on it. And so usually I wake up, I set a little timer and do a 10-15 minute meditation. From there, I, still in bed, do my 10 minute warm up yoga session. And then, most of the time, still in bed, I do a 7 minute power workout. And added to that, lots of walking. I love having my meetings walking, if possible. Um, Very good right now during the pandemic, by the way. If people are in the same town, you can just go for a walk with them. Much better. And it's so for me, my meeting culture hasn't changed much with people that are in the same city.
I'm curious to ask you about, I know you have a 10, 11-year-old son.
Yeah, correct. 11.
What's his name and how Thomas is transmitting these ideas? Because the complexity of these ideas keeps growing. And for 11 years old, we need to teach this not through words, but through actions, meaning, habits. What's your take on that? And what do you do? And how do you plan to keep evolving that relationship with him?
So, um, Noah and I have a very strong relationship, and part of that, the reason why it's so strong is because I've always taken his voice into account. So I've always shown him that he's heard and that he's taken seriously. So in doing so, I have to explain a lot of stuff, and I can go into endless stories on anecdotes of occurrences of this, but what it forces me to do is to reduce the complexity. And I find that this is tremendously helpful for me too. The better I can explain it to him, the better I can explain it to myself. We tend to use um, systems, dynamics, language, and complexity and all of these words to gloss over that we're not really engaging in the intellectually hard work to really step into this and understand it. And while you could say that it's never possible, it is also true that a large portion of it can be understood. And this is where this leads you usually is to what a phrase I've used before, which I think Daniel Schmachtenberger came up with, the generator functions. You might be familiar with the cellular automaton from Stephen Wolfram. It's this idea that imagine you have like a line of blocks. These blocks are white or black. There are very trivial rules attached to each of those. The rule could be if your right neighbor is white and your left neighbor is black, then your next iteration, the next generation is black. But if both are white, it's white. Whatever, you can come up with random rules. And these very basic sets, these very basic rules, then over generations create enormously complex patterns. And if you just looked at the result, at the pattern, the complex pattern, you wouldn't know how to explain it, usually, unless you break it down into these very trivial rule sets. And this is how I see a generator function. And once you are capable of explaining a generator function to yourself, you're also capable of explaining that to an 11-year-old. And then, in addition to that, you asked about so where is this taking us? In addition to that, a kid doesn't have filters that are, let's say, a kid that has been brought up in a partner, in a model of partnership compared to a model of hierarchy, doesn't have the same filters of respect as we usually would expect in society, which means that he will really put his fingers in my wounds. So with that, he forces, first of all, he points out if I haven't understood something. And secondly, he points out if I'm not living according to standard. So since the configuration of my life means that there is some hopping of continents, he's very unhappy about that. And he refuses to come to Costa Rica. He stays in Berlin because he doesn't want to fly. He's not afraid of flying. He actually he loves flying, to be honest, but he doesn't want to produce CO2. And even buying back the carbon doesn't help, which I do, but he says that's just an excuse. So one of the things we're doing right now is preparing for when he's 18 years old, to cross the Atlantic in a boat, in a sailboat. Right? So we're carbon neutral. We're also going to build some off-grid living situation in Costa Rica, and we're going to build an off-grid living situation in Berlin. And to do so in the city, we are currently in the process of buying a boat. And that will have things like water treatment, um, water, um, wastewater treatment, so filtering in both directions, energy production, of course, so that we can show that we can minimize our footprint wherever we are. So that's kind of some of the things we're doing.
Thank you for sharing that. In a recent podcast that you participated, the host gave you 3 words to describe yourself, and you took like 20 seconds to respond. And I really loved your 3 words, which was optimistic beyond reason. Um, which I don't think you have thought of before, but I found that three words very insightful. Could you elaborate on how can we define optimistic, beyond, and reason as three separate words, and what does
Mhm.
it mean to have those three words in the same sentence?
So thank you for giving me the words because I would have been at a loss to remember them. I think it's very easy to explain. I think the reason why I took 20 seconds was how can I distill that into three words? So optimistic, being optimistic is a decision. And I think it's important to highlight that. There is absolutely, currently, looking at the data of the world, there's not much reason to be optimistic. So it's even more important to make that decision. So my intellect, my data, my prefrontal cortex, my data crunching machine tells me we're fucked. And we're fucked in a way that we will we will hit a hard wall, probably somewhere in the next 10, 20, 30 years. And the distribution of suffering during that event will be extremely uneven, and a lot of people will be severely harmed and die. That's what the data tells me. And I'm optimistic, although I have this data and although I am convinced that this is currently, looking at the data, the most likely outcome, that there are other options. And unless I nurture that hope and unless I optimize my thinking, my acting towards a good outcome, I'm unless I do that, I'm working for the bad outcome. This is kind of like not voting for anybody is voting for the bad guy.
Okay, so before we started recording, you told me that I could ask you anything. So here's the question. It's very straightforward, and it's
Yeah.
not the first time you've been asked this. But January 2021. What are you afraid today? What are your fears today? And yeah, what's that?
On what level?
Just the most pressing
Okay.
fears that you have could be whatever,
Hmm?
big or
So,
small.
so, so what I'm through the shift I was just talking about earlier, with rebuilding our entire housing situation. That is kind of like a scary thing, right? Betting is a stable situation in terms of housing, and something that can go wrong in so many directions is crazy. But I wouldn't live up to my own and my son's and my wife's expectations if we didn't do that, right? So I, I don't want to end my life saying, "Oh, I felt so comfortable in my apartment in Berlin. I never um, dared to do these things that I wanted to do so much, right? Because I might lose more than I gain, which is typical for any new situation. We never know what we gain and what we lose. And so that's something that has a certain fear component to it. But I'm also very happy about that fear because I need these types of existential changes from time to time to remind myself not to take things for granted, to grow in all sorts of ways, to allow myself to make mistakes, to allow myself to be hurt, um, or grow or be happy. So that's on that level. Another fear I have is that there will be some nasty stuff happening on the 20th of January in the US. Another fear I have is that some of the energy the people you were referring to earlier, that they gained during the pandemic, because suddenly this more people could feel that something in the world is weird, and we're all in it. This was the first time in a long, long time that all of humanity could had the same problem. We all have the same problem, but we don't feel it directly. With the pandemic, we could feel it directly. And I fear that this energy will evaporate very quickly at one point when enough people have been vaccinated, which will happen sometime this year, and that then the big consumption party will just kick into higher gear. I don't believe that we have gone far enough and we've learned enough in that time. So that's what I fear a little.
To start closing this conversation, I would ask, What would you say to a physician, a psychologist, a coach, a nutrition specialist, a health professional who wants to start thinking more in terms of systems, who wants to start thinking about their own profession and their own interactions with their patients, but also in this interdependent framework as humans, as the same species, as a provider and a client, as immersed in this economical, political, etc., environmental environment. What tools do you suggest they can arm themselves with so that they see their profession as also part of a larger interaction with other systems and not only on the clinical consultation room environment?
I would ask them if somehow possible, they could create deals with their patients or with their environments for keeping them healthy. So let me give you an example to explain that a little bit better. 2-3 weeks ago, I went for a check-in with my Chinese medicine man. And I go there definitely every time I feel something is off. And reliably, he fixes whatever's off. Not in one session, but over the course of 2, 3, sometimes 5, 6 sessions. And in theory, we have this agreement that I come there every couple of months, and I hadn't been there for 2 years or something. So I went there, and he was quite happy with my state, but he had some things that he wanted to adjust, and then we wanted to set the next date, and I said, it's hard to plan. And he said, Thomas, I think you don't understand what Chinese medicine is about. This isn't a one-off fix-it thing. This continuous work. So I'm not saying that everybody should go into Chinese medicine, but what I'm saying is that if you trust your intuition as a human, knowing what you know about the human body, you know what's right and what's not right. And what's right, I would bet what your intuition tells you is that you need to engage with the people, understand them on a regular level, on a regular basis. And you will be able to keep them healthy with much more ease and much more joy and fun for everybody involved than to periodically heal them. And I don't know how that would pan out as a business model, especially given the way insurance companies work, but maybe in the US, it might be a little bit easier. And start experimenting with this. And just as a last little idea to add to this, I sometimes when I do some consultancy work that I sometimes do, it's very hard for me to say what the value of this is, right? Depending on the value I create, my hour sometimes should be worth a couple of 100,000, right? But usually it's not. So what I sometimes say is, pay me whatever it's worth to you, and I've never been disappointed. So that is something, and you can run small experiments. You can pick 1 or 2 people from your community that you somehow trust, and you can say, okay, let's run this. Let's do this. Let's do this for 2, 3 years, and let's see. Nobody loses a thing here, and we see what happens. And I bet something amazing will happen.
I love it, my friend. I really want to thank you for this amazing conversation. We, as expected, but not as expected in the way that you never know where the conversation will go. We touched upon many topics, and they're all interconnected. We had the rain joining us, so thank you
And
also.
now it's gone, just in time.
And now it's gone, and but we're here thanks to the rain also. And in a sense, this conversation was also to keep allowing this rain to keep coming.
Yes.
So thank you so much for your time. If you want to close with any message, please go ahead. And thank you again.
The only message I have is that it is so important that you and all the other people out there who do similar things to what you do continue to do what you do, to spread the word, to dig into maybe sometimes uncomfortable questions and conversations in order to expand what we can do as with our story and rewriting our stories. So thank you. And thank you for having me.
Thank you, my friend. You have a great day.
You too.